Before the pyramids pierced the heavens, before pharaohs sat upon golden thrones, and before names like Cleopatra and Ramses echoed through eternity, there was the Nile. Egypt is more than a civilization. It is the memory of humanity written in stone, sand, and myth. For over 3,000 years, Egypt stood as one of the greatest powers on earth, a kingdom of living gods, eternal monuments, and timeless legacies. This is not just history. This is the story of Egypt, from its first farmers to its last queen. Subscribe to Thrones of Time and journey with us through the sands of eternity. Long before stone temples or hieroglyphs, the Nile carved life through the desert. Around 10,000 BCE, as the Ice Age ended, humans began settling along the river. They hunted, gathered, and slowly, learned to farm. These early people weren't yet Egyptians, but they were the ancestors. Villages formed. People began to worship the river, the sun, the stars. Over thousands of years, two great cultures emerged, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. Around 3500 BCE, these cultures developed distinct identities: pottery, art, burial rituals. Conflict was inevitable. Rival chiefs rose, fought, and fell. One would rise above all. His name was Narmer, also known as Menes. Around 3100 BCE, Narmer did the unthinkable: he united Upper and Lower Egypt. A single kingdom was born. Egypt's first dynasty, and the beginning of 3,000 years of pharaohs. With unification came a golden age. The Old Kingdom gave rise to one of the most iconic periods in human history. Pharaohs like Djoser and his architect Imhotep began building monumental tombs, the first step pyramids. Then came the Great Ones. At Giza, Pharaoh Khufu built the Great Pyramid, over 2 million stone blocks, aligned with the stars, standing over 480 feet tall. This was not a tomb. It was a message to the gods, and to time itself. Egypt was ruled not by kings, but by gods. The pharaoh was Horus on earth, divine ruler, high priest, general, and god. A centralized state controlled agriculture, labor, religion, and death. But such grandeur required wealth, control, and obedience. When Nile floods weakened, so did the throne. The Old Kingdom fell, not by invasion, but collapse from within. Egypt fractured. Regional governors, nomarchs, seized power. For nearly 150 years, Egypt was divided. Famine struck. Temples were looted. The Nile's failure wasn't just natural, it was seen as divine punishment. But amid the chaos, new dynasties emerged, especially in Thebes. One Theban prince would reunite the land. His name was Mentuhotep II. And with him began a new chapter. The Middle Kingdom. With Mentuhotep II, Egypt was reborn. The Middle Kingdom restored order, justice, and innovation. Pharaohs of this era, like Senusret I and Amenemhat III, extended canals, built new temples, and reformed bureaucracy. The capital moved to Ichtoi, near the Fayum, a fertile basin turned into farmland by royal engineering. Trade routes stretched to Nubia, Byblos, and Punt. Art became more realistic. Literature flourished, including The Tale of Sinew, one of history's first fictional narratives. But no dynasty lasts forever. As local rulers gained power, unity slipped once again. And from the northeast came a storm Egypt never expected. The Hyksos, foreigners with new weapons, new tactics, and war chariots. Egypt entered its second intermediate period. The Hyksos established their rule in the Nile Delta, forming the 15th dynasty. They introduced horses, chariots, composite bows, military tech Egypt lacked. But in the south, Thebes remained unconquered. A line of warrior princes prepared for war. Seqenenre fought. He died in battle, his skull still bears brutal wounds. His sons continued the fight. Finally, Ahmose drove the Hyksos out of Egypt. And in victory, he founded the new kingdom, Egypt's golden age. The new kingdom was Egypt at its peak, powerful, wealthy, and expansive. Ahmose I rebuilt the country. Then came Thutmose I, who pushed Egypt's borders into Nubia and Syria. But the greatest conquests belonged to Thutmose III, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Over 17 military campaigns, he created Egypt's largest empire. And then, a queen unlike any other. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh, ruled peacefully for 2 decades. She built the Grand Temple at Deir el-Bahari and traded with Punt. Her statues were masculine, her rule, powerful. But peace was shattered by revolution. Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, introduced monotheism, worshipping only Aten, the sun disk. He built a new capital, Amarna. Art became distorted, alien, surreal. His reign shook Egypt's religious foundations. After Akhenaten came Tutankhamun, the boy king. He restored the old gods, but died young. His tomb, discovered in 1922, became one of the greatest archaeological finds of all time. Then came Egypt's most legendary ruler, Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great. He reigned for 66 years. Built temples across Egypt, including the colossal Abu Simbel. Fought the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, and signed history's first known peace treaty. Fathered over 100 children. Under Ramses, Egypt wasn't just a kingdom. It was an empire of stone, blood, and immortality. But after Ramses, power slowly faded. Invasions, economic troubles, and internal weakness plagued Egypt. The sea peoples ravaged the Mediterranean. Egypt survived, but it would never again be as mighty. From unity to conquest, from queens to heretics, the story of Egypt echoes in every monument. But this is only the beginning. In Part 3, we'll explore Egypt's fall, foreign invasions, the rule of Cleopatra, and the end of Pharaohs. Subscribe to Thrones of Time, and let history rise again from the dust. With the death of Ramses XI, Egypt fractured. The Third Intermediate Period began, a time of divided rule. In Thebes, high priests of Ammonius held power. In the north, pharaohs ruled from Tanis and Bubastis. The unity of the Nile was lost. Foreigners entered the game, especially Libyans. Shoshenq I, a Libyan chieftain, founded the 22nd dynasty. He's even mentioned in the Bible as Shishak, the pharaoh who attacked Jerusalem. But despite brief resurgence, Egypt was now vulnerable. And new invaders were on the horizon. Psamtik I of the 26th dynasty reunified Egypt with foreign mercenaries, Greeks, Libyans, even Phoenicians. Under his rule, and his son Necho II, Egypt enjoyed a brief renaissance. Canals were dug, temples restored, and contact with the Mediterranean world deepened. But the threat from the east loomed large. The Assyrians raided, then the Persians conquered. Cambyses II of Persia defeated Psamtik III in 525 BCE, making Egypt a satrapy, a mere province in the Achaemenid Empire. In 332 BCE, the world shifted again. Alexander the Great, just 24, marched into Egypt. The people welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. At Siwa Oasis, the oracle of Ammonius declared him the son of a god. He founded Alexandria, a city destined to become Egypt's cultural heart for centuries. Though Alexander would die young in Babylon, his legacy in Egypt was just beginning. After Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy I Soter took control of Egypt. The Ptolemaic dynasty fused Greek and Egyptian traditions. Pharaohs spoke Greek, but dressed as Egyptian gods. The Library of Alexandria became a beacon of learning, with over 400,000 scrolls. Mathematicians, astronomers, and physicians flocked to Alexandria. Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference. Hipparchus charted the stars. It was a golden age of science, yet politically unstable. By the 1st century BCE, the dynasty was weak. And in the final act of Egypt's ancient story, entered a queen. Cleopatra VII was brilliant, multilingual, and politically savvy. She aligned with Julius Caesar, bore him a son, and briefly restored stability. After Caesar's death, she allied with Mark Antony, defying Rome's rising star, Octavian. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra were defeated. 1 year later, facing capture, they each took their own lives. And with Cleopatra's death, ended over 3,000 years of Egyptian pharaohs. Egypt became a Roman province. Augustus Caesar, once Octavian, absorbed its wealth into the Roman Empire. Temples still stood. Priests still chanted. But now, Egypt answered to Rome. Christianity eventually spread. Temples became churches. Ancient gods faded into memory. But Egypt's story was far from forgotten. For over 3,000 years, Egypt was a beacon of culture, power, and mystery. It gave the world its first pharaohs. Its first engineers. Its first great civilization. It survived collapse, conquest, and change. And still, it stands. This was the entire history of ancient Egypt. Subscribe to Thrones of Time, where the ancient world lives again.